Namaste and greetings. I, Mahima Kapoor, researcher and assistant editor at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, welcome you all to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. In light of the budget announcement on the 1st of February, we have gathered for a panel discussion on local governance and union budget 2022 to 23 under the series #Local Governance. This deliberation is being organized by the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. I feel honored to introduce the chair, Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar. Sir is former Deputy Mayor, Shimla, and visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. I feel privileged to introduce our eminent panel today.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I feel privileged to introduce our eminent panel for today. Dr. Javed Alam Khan is the thematic lead, Fiscal Decentralization at the Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. Professor Manjula Bharathy is a professor at the Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Prakash Mathur is a senior fellow at the Global Cities Institute, University of Toronto, Toronto. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Srinivas Alavilli is the head Civic Participation at the Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy, Bengaluru. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mahima.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Joy Elamin is the Director General, Kerala Institute of Local Administration, Thrissur. Welcome, sir. Now I invite Mr. Tikender to take the proceedings further, and we look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and please pardon me for not able to remove my mask because I'm traveling, and therefore, please allow me to speak with the mask on. So good morning and good evening for our panelists who have joined us from different parts of the world. And I believe this discussion is going to be a very interesting one on the budget that's recently placed by our Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. And, there's lots of discussion about this budget and from different aspects, of course, but we wanted to view it from the urban governance aspect and how actually the so-called cities being considered to be engines of growth and how this budget is going to affect the overall city development process. But let me, before handing over our esteemed speakers to actually specifically point out the issues of the challenges that this budget poses before the cities and the towns, and of course what is good and what is bad. Of course, that's what we are going to discuss. But let me just flag 3 or 4 issues. The first one happens to be about, and I'm glad that the Finance Minister mentioned about that we require a different paradigm of urbanization. I don't know what different paradigm for our Finance Minister or the current government means, but I'm actually a very basic fundamental point that the way in the processes in which we are unfolding our urbanization is not sustainable. But then this also leads me to caution all of us, because we have seen some of the documents of the current government whereby some glimpse of what the alternative or what this new paradigm could be. And if that is the alternative paradigm, then I would say it would be disastrous. It would be far worse than what we are witnessing. Now, the 2 documents that I'm referring to, the first one happens to be the NUPF, that's the National Urban Policy Framework, which was prepared by the National Institute of Urban Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the technical stuff, I mean, something that that is highly exclusive in the present context. So if that is it, then it's a dangerous thing that we are going to have. So the finance minister also spell out how that's going to happen with a team of experts. The only team of experts that I know of is the first urban commission that was formed under the chairperson, under the chairmanship of Charles Correa. We didn't have any other urban commission. So what kind of people would there be? So, you know, I think that's an important question which I would like our guests also to actually make their comments on. And the second is, of course, the Niti Aayog. I mean, what Niti Aayog has been suggesting, and it's horrendous the way the land use change is being allowed right from the Niti Aayog instead of going via various routes. For example, the Andaman Nicobar Islands and the Lakshadweep, where there's complete metamorphosis, complete change that is witnessed. So that's not going to be, and that's not the sustainable way, according to me, if that is what the government is actually trying to understand. That's the first. The second thing, actually, when the government accepts the fact that this is not a sustainable way, or we want another alternative paradigm, then what are the issues? And I think this budget has been a complete I mean, this government missed that opportunity. I mean, this budget missed an opportunity when the urban centers were screaming for employment, for jobs. And according to the World Bank and various other statistics, we have a figure that almost 200 million are unemployed in India. So what the least that this government could have announced in this budget was, and that you didn't require lots of budget for that, was the Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme. Why was it not rolled out? Despite there was a loud cry, and this loud cry was not coming from the working class associations or from the jobless. Of course, it was coming from their groups, but also from the CII. The industry is feeling the pinch because we have huge joblessness that is growing, and with this joblessness, actually, it is the demand constrained. The demand that is getting affected. So it's a kind of demand constrained economy that we are entering. So we have huge spike in inflation, but at the same time, we are also witnessing stagnation. So that's the second issue I think our panelists would like to speak upon. The third thing, let's talk about some of the flagship programs. Well, 3 years ago, not 3 years, but a few years ago, more than that, we were hearing a lot of buzz about the smart cities. Arjun, I checked the budget not once, twice, thrice. There's not a word on the smart cities. Why is it so? So the budget doesn't even speak about smart cities. You know, that were considered to be flagship programs, which were considered to be lighthouses. I mean, those lighthouses were further supposed to shed light on the rest of urban India. And as far as the urban development budget is also concerned, if you see, this was somewhere around 0.5% of GDP in the current year, and for the coming 2022-23, it's gone down to 0.47%. So you do not find really very, you know, as the government is claiming to hike in urban development. So what is this government focusing on? I mean, government is focusing on more of, I mean, the 80 lakh houses that we are talking about. I would not comment on that because I would like the panel to suggest more, though we have only 50 houses that have completed under the PMAY urban in the previous years. So how do they view it? But of course, it speaks about massive capital investment. I think that's a catch because definitely it's a welcome move. But at the same time, if you see in the current budget, out of the budget on capital investment, in the revised estimates, you'll find 52,000 crores goes to actually settle the debt of comes as capital expenditure, or if we have to buy a Rafale, and that comes as a capital expenditure on defense, I do not think that is going to create more infrastructure, that is going to create more jobs for the urban. So overall, I think the problem persists. The government fails to understand, where it should have focused more. And it's more like the PPP models, the PPP models, not just in housing, but 20,000 buses. And I was calculating there are 5,000. Four buses for each town, and it's ridiculous. At the same time, these buses and this fleet would be run by a PPP model, focus on metros. So the metros will actually, it's more, something that we have been cribbing about, something that we have been asking, for heaven's sake, please stop that. And that is the focus on capital intensive technologies. Unfortunately, I do not find a shift from that direction. With that opening remarks, and then of course, once the discussion is there, we'll be open to questions. I think we are live on the Facebook. So our friends who have joined us here, and also who have joined on the Facebook, and put questions in the comment box, and then we can forward those questions to our panelists, to our guests. And I think, yeah. So over to you. I think, have I taken lots of time, or is it okay?
No, sir, it's okay.
Great, thank you so much. So I think you're going to introduce the guests, and we can just go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for setting the mood for the discussion that will follow. Without wasting any time, I would like to invite Professor Mathur to share his insights regarding the topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahima. I'm meeting the chairperson after quite some time. I used to meet him quite often earlier, but this is also the occasion to, it's a very happy occasion that I'm meeting a new set of panelists whom I have not met before. So these are the positive fallouts of the seminar or the webinar that IMPRI is organizing this morning. I just heard the remarks of the chairperson. He has obviously broadened the scope of the webinar this morning much more than I thought this webinar will be discussing. And I think this is a very welcome thing that he has done. And we should really not be bound by merely the title of the webinar, and really look at the urban sector and what really is happening to the urban sector in India over the past 3, 4, 5 years or so. But let me also not disappoint IMPRI. Let me first deal specifically with the budget, because that is what the title says, the budget for 2023. And what does the budget say about local government, not governance, but local governance? And rightly, I will focus on urban governance. Then we will broaden the debate, bring in other central government initiatives into the discussion. So there are only 2 instruments with the central government with which they can impact local government. One is the budget, the union budget itself. And the second channel or the second instrument the central government has is to impact local governments via the Finance Commission, and which is a very important instrument in the hands of the central government to make impact on local government function. If you look at the budget, and I've gone through the figures very carefully, you will find that the amount or the allocation for the urban sector is more or less the same as it was last year, roughly about 45,000 crore. Last year it was about 43,000 something. And to inflation adjust the amount, I do not think that there has been any increase in the budget allocation. That's point number 1. But the second thing, which is new in the budget, and which the chairperson was making a mention of it, is a proposal to set up an expert committee to look into urbanization. The provocation being that by the year 2047, India will be 50% urban. And what I read in between the lines of what the finance minister said day before, or the first, is that what should be the pathway for India to take in order that by the year we become 50% urban, urbanization is much more orderly than what it is today. Now, that is the kind of language that the finance minister has used, that we need orderly urban development in the country. I'll come to that later. So this is one instrument, being the allocation. Allocations are the same, but there is important provision with respect to urban policy, pension, the finance minister's speech. The second instrument that the central government has, as I said, is through the Finance Commission. And the 15th Finance Commission, I'm sure that all the panelists would have seen the report, is in a sense very awe-inspiring. Never before have I seen a Finance Commission entering into areas that the 15th Finance Commission has entered, making life of local governments both difficult, but if you look at it not from the point of view as to what the local governments will do, but in terms of what is intended to be done, that is stimulating local government finance to begin with, picking up at least 3 sectors which are pronounced local government, local public goods, such as water, wastewater, and solid waste, making them as national priorities, not the local public goods. The important language change that the 15th Finance Commission has brought in, that these are the national priorities. What are the national priorities? Water, solid waste, and liquid waste. These are 3. And the third thing that the Finance Commission has said, that we need to set up at least 8 new cities in the country. And the fourth thing that it is saying is that we need to look at, we need to sort of bring in action plans, annual action plans from local governments if they wish to take advantage of the granting aid which has been recommended by the Finance Commission. Now, this has been very brief, what the 2 instruments, and they have recommended roughly about 24,000 crore annually. So if you add 24,000 as recommended by the Finance Commission annually, and if you take into account the budget is provided, which is 45,000 crore, this is all that will flow to the local governments, quote unquote, by the central government in the year 2022-23. Now, we often say that local governments are a state subject, but simply using these 2 instruments, the central government impacts local government in a much bigger way than either the state government do or what the local government do themselves with whatever limited powers they have under the state municipal acts and so on. So this is the framework within which we need to really look at what the chairperson of the session says. I would tend to agree with him that there's a complete urban mess, in a sense, in the country. The 5 missions that this present government has been implementing right from 2015, beginning with smart cities. Incidentally, Mr. Mayor, smart city, the word has been used. If you look at form number 6, where the allocations have been made, you will find a mention of smart cities there. But you are quite right that in the speech, the finance minister does not mention the word smart city. For that matter, she does not mention any of the other missions either. So one is, of course, the smart cities, then you have Amrit, you have the livelihood mission, you have the PMMI, and then you have the Swachh Bharat. These are the 5 things where central government has been, the present government, the NDA, has been implementing these 5 missions. You juxtapose these 5 missions against the urban sector's performance overall. Whether you look at, these missions impact urbanization in different ways. They impact the scale, they expand the distribution across city sizes. You see that in the relationship between urbanization and economic growth. You also see that being reflected in urban infrastructure development. And irrespective of the indicator that they use, that we might choose, you will find that the pace of urbanization, simply the speed at which it's growing, has slowed down considerably. It's not growing at all. And what is growing is really not the statutory town population. I'm sure that everyone would have seen the very carefully the census figures. But what is growing in the name of the urban population is the census town, which really now contributes a very significant proportion. So the urbanization is really taking place outside municipal boundaries and not inside. Now you can say that, well, the cities have no place, the densities are low, but that is also not borne by the facts. Our densities have not risen or declined. They're more or less the same for the past 2 decades or so, because that's what's happening. You would also find that there's a weakening of the relationship between urbanization and economic growth. Wherever we find figures of the urban shares of the GDP, the figures are really 2011-12, but we do find there's a weakening of the relationship. And what has declined really is the shares of manufacturing, real estate, and financial services, which are the 3 pronounced sectors, the urban sector. And you will find that the share of these in the GDP has declined over the period 2004-5 to 2011-12. So in some ways, what the chair said, that we are seeing these very ominous signs with respect to urbanization would seem to be correct. How we deal with them, he did bring in the National Commission on Urbanization in South Korea, and now it will be pitted against the new committee that will be set up. We don't know what the composition will be. I guess they will decide in due course of time, but whether that would be as powerful a commission as it was, which was led by Charles Korea and Mahesh Bose, and so on and so forth. And I was director of NIU at that point, and we were servicing the commission in those years. Let me stop at this point, and I'll come back again if there's time, and supplement my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very enriching perspective. I would now like to invite Mr. Srinivas to further this discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mahima. How much time are you giving to each of the panelists? 5 minutes?
About
10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Oh, fantastic. Great. Thank you. I may not take up all the 10 minutes, but it's wonderful hearing from Professor Mathur, and of course, Tikender's brought a wonderful perspective.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Tikender.
So the questions that our guests can ask, I hope somebody is following it on the Facebook as well.
I am doing it, sir. No problem.
Yes.
Great. Thanks. That's all. Thanks. Sorry. Please. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let me, organize my thoughts in a brief period of time so that we can further this conversation. I will, highlight some of the things that I found that are very interesting and useful, and things that I found that are big disappointments, or things that I would, have hope to see more or better. First of all, it's very awkward. In fact, when the session has announced itself, I was wondering how do I go about this, because we are talking about union budget and local governments. So what has union budget got to do with local governments is a question that many of us can ask, that truly believe in the theory of subsidiarity and believe in the federal nature of our governance with three-tier structure and all of that. Talking about local governments in union budget is somewhat similar to talking about defense budget in a Punjab state budget or a Gujarat state budget, right? We don't get to talk about what are we doing for border security in a state budget. Similarly, why are we talking about a city level issues when we are concerned about union budget? So I think this, I know it's very idealistic position to take, but I think it's important to make that point. And in few years from now, we should probably, hopefully never have a discussion about local government, but we'll have 30 different discussions about each state budget and what that has done or not done for the cities of that state. That's what I would like to see, and esteemed forums like IMPRI and our guests to be putting their energy into that sort of thing. The single biggest disappointment I have every time we talk about budget, and as someone who's been in the public domain for the last 10 years or so, as an activist, as a civic activist, and now working with Janaagraha, I often get called upon the day before the budget announcement, whether it is union or state, to get my opinion, right? The newspapers always carry, he said, she said, what is your thumbs up, thumbs down, positive, negative? This is a routine, right? I mean, and that goes on with every budget. And we get to follow the budget process in extremely great detail, including, what color was the suitcase that the minister brought the budget in. Now it's the color of the iPad cover, no longer a suitcase is brought. And what color of the sari in this case, and then what's the halwa ceremony that they're doing, this enormous attention on the budget making of Government of India. Perhaps justifiably so, because it's a public money, and this is an account of how that money is being spent. But my worry is that with all that excitement and media focus and all that about union government, and to similar extent to state government, there is barely any peep about city budgets. Nobody even knows when Bengaluru passed its budget, Kolkata passed its budget. Nobody even knows that in the next few months, the biggest cities of India, namely Chennai, Mumbai, Bengaluru, and Delhi, all of them are going for elections in the next few months. Everybody knows that Manipur is going for elections. Goa has a fierce political battle. UP, everybody knows. But when it comes to cities, we don't. And that translates into budget also. I think at the outset, I would like to say that I'd like to see more conversation and debate and intellectual, arguments around how city budgets are created, made, and whether they're delivering or not. So that would be my first point, and I'd like to request IMPRI to hold a session on analyzing some of the city budgets in the subsequent sessions. Professor Mathur talked a lot about the Finance Commission. I'm a very big fan of Finance Commission. I think since 14th Finance Commission, they have done phenomenally well in terms of realizing the need of strengthening, empowering cities financially. What used to happen is that you would do the revolution at the state level, and you would expect the state level to devolve further to the cities and the villages and so on. But everybody has figured out that that's not happening, barring few exceptions like maybe Kerala and West Bengal and a couple of other states. This thing is not happening. So again, the biggest advocacy that is needed is strengthening of the Institute of State Finance Commissions. If the state finance commissions are strong and they are evolved and to become a mature organization institution like the Central Finance Commission, a formula can be developed. Each state deserves its own strategy to develop their cities. Each state has certain competitive advantages. They want to build their economy using the local resources, human resources, natural resources, and all of that is there. Today, we've recently seen the kind of clamoring that we saw from so many ministers of different states inviting Elon Musk to set up shop in their city and their state. It's on one hand, it's very interesting and entertaining to see that there were, the political leaders were going after a global giant to invite them here. But at the very same time, it's also a little saddening, disappointing that it looked like we are a fractured house trying to snatch away business from one house to another. Competition is good, but this kind of thing makes me believe that when you have investments and strategies around city development, this kind of thing automatically happens. Today, the investment destinations are based on availability of talent pool. The ecosystem of Bengaluru, where I live, for example, is so strong that if it tries to set up any sort of software business, there is no other place to look at because of the mature industry. So how do you build such mature industries in so many cities? And how do you go beyond mega cities? We cannot survive with having 5 or 10 mega cities. We need 1,000 cities. And we don't want mega cities because of all the other issues you already know about mega cities. Whatever mega cities we have are great, wonderful. Let's keep them and make them great. But going forward, we should be focused on building medium-sized cities and not super mega cities that we have today. So in that sense, the budget has some positive points. It does talk about reimagining cities, nurturing of mega cities, and facilitating of tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I thought that's a very positive, progressive statement that the union budget has made. Again, one may ask that what has union government got to do with it? But then in our constitution, in our system, we don't have a very clear separation of powers between different tiers of government. So therefore, it does make sense for the government of India also to think about what sort of industry need to be developed in which state and which city, and therefore, how do we nurture them? And the second point that I really liked about the union budget is about the commitment to support for planning. And this urban planning, they identified, I think all of us that work in the urban areas know very well that one of the weakest links of cities is to have a function called planning. Our cities are basically, they build on their own, they run on their own, they collapse on their own. Nothing major happens in terms of planning and changing the direction of it. I'm slightly exaggerating for the sake of effect, but I think you will all agree with me that there isn't much of a planned development happening. In fact, most of the cities have grown without plan, and that's why we are where we are. Whereas the budget talks about support for better town planning, creation of capacity building for planning, town planning schemes, creation of academic connections. So there is a certain skill that is being built over a period of time. The smallest town of Odisha or Andhra Pradesh or West Bengal, they all deserve to have planners. Urban planning is a relatively nascent field in India. And a lot of young people are now studying urban planning. Those used to study architecture are now, many of them are interested in urban planning, sustainable development, and all of that. In a few years from now, we are going to have such a variety of practitioners that have practical experience. So it's important that at a central level or union level, we create such things. And I'm glad to see a comment made in the union budget towards that. The mobility, again, union government keeps reiterating sustainable mobility at every opportunity. It's a very welcome thing to do. I think I'm worried that it is more of words, because when you talk about public transport and sustainable mobility, all that translates to the union government mostly is metro. They keep building metro everywhere, even in small towns where it is absolutely a white elephant and maybe not even needed. And the experiences of metros in many cities already tell us that, the cost benefit ratio doesn't work in certain places and all that. Whereas the low hanging fruit, the future of Indian cities is the bus. Bus is where the most of the people, cities of India, the population of India travels today. Whereas the bus gets absolutely no innovation, no recognition, no funding support, no, none of that. Right? If you take any particular city and look at the investment the city makes in the bus versus, say, a metro, you will be flabbergasted that why such amounts of money are being spent on something that carries so little number of people and comes at such a huge cost to the environment and to all of that. A case can be made that metro is useful over the long run, say 100 years, and we must build cities for the next 100 years. But in the short term and in the medium term, the investment in bus must be dramatically increased. What can union government do about it? This falls under the state government, in my opinion. So what union government can do is to do a challenge to the bus manufacturers of India. Like we have auto lobby, auto manufacturers, that India is now one of the world's biggest auto manufacturing industry. Why not become the biggest bus manufacturing industry? Why not create city buses that suit the needs of Indian cities? Indian cities are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. The lanes are narrow, the curves are different, and standard bus design doesn't work. So I would have loved to see a design challenge thrown at by the union government to the biggest manufacturers like Mahindras and the Tatas and Leylands and all of them, and ask them to create, but no such thing to be found. So the mobility intent is appreciable, but the too much focus on metro seems to be counterintuitive to me. The budget also talked nice things about energy transition. And it's important that the union government gets involved in the energy transition, because it's at a global level. India has made certain commitments. Honorable Prime Minister has made commitments to the rest of the world on behalf of India. And we must recognize that these commitments cannot be fulfilled sitting in Delhi by union government or any state government. They must translate into city level climate action. The budget is short on details on this, but generally is pointing out that such a thing is needed. So I'm very happy to see that there is an intent in that. How do you go about it? How do you build capacities for creating climate action? These are the things that the union government has a better position to create based on best practices across the world, and then give it to them, to the different states, to say that here are some role models, and maybe you can use this as a baseline to, like we have the National Urban Mobility Guidelines that talks about pedestrianization, modal share, and all of that. Wonderfully done. But those are policy blueprints and documents that state governments need to take into consideration. And that's where the political will comes into picture. The discussion with states should be, how do you take this and implement it? And here are the incentives that we as a union government can do. I'll come to the disappointments that I have with this budget. The single biggest disappointment is about the lack of GST allocation to the cities. Our cities are the drivers of our economy. It is a cliched statement to make that a significant portion of the GDP, GSDP, any metric that you take comes out of cities. No wonder cities are called the engines of economic growth in India. No wonder urbanization is moving at such a gross pace. Professor Mathur talked about 2014 being so much of 50% urbanization. It might happen sooner also. COVID has changed some things, but urbanization is a reality that you have to expect. The change of livelihoods, the way young people want to work, and the knowledge economy and information age are driving this thing. And urbanization doesn't mean big mega cities. But why are the cities so financially weak? Why is it the cities of India have to look towards Delhi or look towards the state capital every time they want to do some infrastructure or fix their garbage management problem? Why are they not self-sufficient? In fact, all the money that the Honorable Finance Minister of India or the Finance Minister of State are deciding to spend on is originating from the cities. The money is coming from here, from the cities. It ends up in Delhi or state capital, doesn't travel back. There is no formula or a method to send it back to them. So therefore, it leads to discretionary grants and all kinds of things. This is why I said the State Finance Commission need to be strong and empowered. I know Dr. Joy is here. I would like to hear from him on the Kerala State Finance Commission if it is relevant, if he finds it relevant to discuss in this forum. But we need to strengthen the State Finance Commission. And we need to demand that a percentage of the GST has to be given to the city governments. And the city government is the one that is maintaining the restaurants, the shops, providing the footpaths and parking facilities and roads and all of the infrastructure that drive the economy. Why is it that when somebody goes to a restaurant or pays for a particular item in a store,
Some voice issue. Can you hear, sir?
No, sir, I cannot.
It's not, sir. We just lost your audio.
Srinivas, yeah.
Somehow.
Now audible?
No. Would you try? No. Okay. So maybe if you can rejoin, till then we move to our next panelist, Mehma.
Yes, sir. Till sir rejoins, Can I please call Professor Manjula Bharathy for her insights and perspectives on the topic? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahima. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, IMPRI, for inviting this. Like, everyone was saying about, this whole question about, union budget and the local governance, it's little difficult to pitch on that. But then I would like to pitch on, the ways in which the understanding of the local governance is there, whether that has been reflected in its mandate and the commitment of the center in its budget. So whenever we speak about, to understand anything, to critically analyze anything, I feel the philosophical premise of the local governance, basically to broaden and to deepen the democracy. We speak about, the principles to craft a society that promotes and protects, dignity, equality, social justice, and all. So I feel it is prima facie, it is important to critically analyze the philosophical underpinnings of local governance and how then its ideological and epistemological shifts in the governance in the metrics of nation, that is the envisaged changes. If you're looking at the institutional framework, the methodological approaches and the methods of governance, in this, that is reflected in an ideological way in this budget. So if you're trying to look at today's context, specifically in the pandemic phase, economic recession is inflation and inequality, it is looming large in social spectrum. And I feel that are the most important challenges if one try to analyze the budget and see whether the budget is given adequate attention to these issues with the lens of the local governance, if it is having that, So in income equality, especially among the marginal and the vulnerable population in the rural and urban areas, actually you're seeing that the income inequality is increasing and the pandemic has, actually made it worse. So if you take Niti Aayog, because the chair was speaking about the Niti Aayog thing, and if you're taking the Niti Aayog report that prepared the multidimensional poverty index using NFHS data, 2015-16, 25% of the households were found to be multi-dimensional poor in India. This is 1/4 of the population, So if I try to illustrate this point further, towards the attitude of the government towards the poor and the marginals, then if we take the multi-dimensional poverty index, and can we have, because the budget, it is important to look at the food economy, especially the time of the pandemic, and then look at that almost, like 20 to 25% cut in agriculture union budget. Very interestingly, when I try to look at that, look at the hoarding of the grains that happens. If you're looking at the food economy, hoarding of the grain that happens, it is increased almost by 20 million tons. And then the hoarded grains, if you're looking at kind of, taking an approximate estimate of that, somewhere around 100 million tons, and the government is sitting on that, I think one of the most highest food stock by any country in the world, So, but during the pandemic, if you're looking at Janaagraha, for example, because that is one of the important things, if you're looking at the local governance structure, whether, the government has any plans of making by paying 50% as wages grain, but food subsidy expenditure, if you're looking at that, there's a cut. And the bulk of the food subsidy, you can see that used for towards the maintenance of this hoarding, food grain in the warehousing. So as a person, when you're looking at the budget, as a vision statement, as a statement of the government towards this whole question of the welfare state, I feel is a serious statement and an indicator of the budget towards the commitment to deepen federalism, how it is looking at the federalism and the participatory governance. So it speaks in volumes, in silence also, And then if you're looking at the constitutional amendments, the state, of the local governance institutions, which plan and implement schemes and policies for economic development and justice, after nearly 25 years of decentralization, the local governance expenditure is a percentage of, 2% of the GDP, which is actually, we're looking at that at other countries like China, which is somewhere around 11%, or Brazil, somewhere around 7%. So when we are thinking about, that is what I said in the beginning, this whole question of the ideological moving and the philosophical understanding, the whole question of federalism, and then the intent of the government, of of the country towards the local governance is being very much specifically said in this 2% of, that. And allocating budget, if you're looking at that, because the other panelists were speaking about the whole importance of, the Finance Commission. And then the 15th Finance Commission, the local body somewhere around, 90,000 crores and 60,000 somewhere around to the rural local bodies and 30,000 somewhere to the urban local bodies. But then if we somewhere kind of, go for looking for the local governance, decentralization is something very important. And decentralization, we have deconcentration. Then we are looking for devolution and then privatization, So if you're looking for the political decentralization, we have actually made from the 2nd tier, the 2 tier, 3 tier, we know that. But if you're looking at the functional decentralization of the UMPs and whether that has been, out of the 18 functions, like, that earlier speaker was speaking about, and it is actually, if you're looking at the devolution index, which, our institute, Tata Institute, was made in 2015-16, at the urban local bodies and then the local bodies, for instance, it is very, very kind of minimal ways in which the devolution index is working on. And urban local bodies, if you're saying that full authority out of the 18 functions, maybe, like 3 to 5. So today, budget, then speaks, because other speakers again speaks about a shift in the urbanization. And then when you're speaking about a paradigmatic shift in the urbanization, we also look at the urban scenario where the ward committees are important, then what is the status of the ward committees, even when we're speaking about the deepening of the democracy, because Joey is here, Dr. Joey Laman. So then even in a state like Kerala, which speaks about high degree of localization, and then the status of the urban ward committees in the urban scenario is not that promising. So then what we are speaking about, the paradigmatic shift, the urban governance, because it is important to understand the urban local bodies fully in planning, regulation, slum development, water supply and sanitation function. And equally important is to look at the state parastels, such as, like urban development authorities, town planning authorities, slum development boards, urban water supply boards, drainage board, urban infrastructure development board. All this is important. And what is the attitude, of these parastels, towards this whole question about ward committees and then the urban local governance. And especially that have undermined, I feel, the status of urban local bodies. And the next thing that I would like to speak about, I'm just posing certain questions, is about, we are speaking about sustainable development goal, because we are speaking about a paradigmatic shift towards the sustainability. And then we have this whole question of the sustainable development goal. And then latest Niti Aayog report speaks about, the major impediment in operationalization of the sustainable development goal is the absence of the operations at the local level. And why is it happening? I feel this is mainly because, of the functional, financial, and the functional challenges of the local self-governance institutions, So when we're speaking about it, whether they are capacitated at the functional level, at the financial level, at the functional level, and then many studies say that this is the other way around, especially so much important in the context of the pandemic. And the pandemic phase and then associated lockdowns, have actually increased the existing vulnerabilities, I said in the beginning, of the marginalized group, especially living in the cities, towns, and then people working in the informal sector, that is very important, and the urban poor living in the congested and then, overcrowded informal settlements with very inadequate facilities and limited access to water, sanitation, and health facilities. And when we're looking at this group of people, one of the most important social group that needs to mention are the children, especially from the lower socioeconomic strata, who face learning loss and a nutrition loss, because during this pandemic phase, because they're not going to the school for the past 2 years, and the local governance institution, which could be very effective in addressing these issues, and the budget is not touched on those areas, For example, I would like to take the case of Anganwadis. No substantial increase in the budget allocation there. So I feel there is a need to expand engagement with the 4th tier of the government, that is the community-based organization like self-help groups, slum dwellers associations, to ensure a relevant and a timely response to the localized actions and innovations, For example, I would like to speak about the frontline workers. During the pandemic, we all know they have shouldered the additional responsibilities and the first line of response from the government, and then they have an extremely challenging situation where, they have additional working hours without any supplementary increase, in their remuneration. And again, this is in addition to the increased risk of exposure to diseases. But then there is a need to ensure that the potential risk of these frontline workers reduce capacitation of their skills, and then there's their working hours, how to conduct the door-to-day surveys, reading the data, maps and gaps, and making them more aware of the insurances and the social security systems. But if you're looking at the budget, the job opportunities, because for the women, for example, when you're looking at the frontline workers, the job opportunities for the women from the lower socioeconomic strata, the local level, like you have Asha workers, Anganwadi workers, helpers, and these are the critical jobs, I feel, for the women at the local level. You could see that they are an exclusively women cadre jobs. Somewhere around 60 to 70 lakh women there. They have been working through the pandemic, and they don't get any salary hike, or they either get an honorarium and incentive, as you know. But when asked about the women development, the finance minister spoke the importance of the country's recognition, recognizing the importance of women in the national development. But when you're looking at this group of poor women who have been working, then he said we could see that they have been burdened with an additional responsibility for being the volunteers of national development. Budget makes no special allocation for them based on their genuine and small demands. Instead, we know that there have been a lot of strikes and demands from them, and that has not been reflected in the budget. And if you're looking at allocation for women, budget estimate from 2021 to the revised budget, if you're looking at the percentage change, there is a 26% decrease. If you're looking at the percentage change of revised estimate and then the budget expenditure of the 21-22. So there's a reduction in that, So that is what the budget is speaking about, if you're looking at that level, And the last one that I would like to speak about, because since I'm looking at it from the perspective of the local governance, we say that the local governance is important, building a local resilience. How can we do that? It is important is to the integrated local planning. Again, the former speaker, Srinivas, was speaking about it, But then whether the government approach, when you're saying about the local plan, then the local plan should be a spatial, physical, social and economic plan, should be its cornerstones. So the local regions in that case need to encourage and support to adapt a dynamic spatial planning perspective, That is the paradigm shift I would like to, mention. Unlike the one that speaks that in the budget, dynamic spatial paradigmatic shift at the local level than the static land use planning approach that has been practiced in India. That takes into consideration the social realities in the local context, building resilient communities. The other important point, one more point I would like to end, that the disaster management, because whenever we are speaking about the local level intervention, the disaster management and the ways in which in the pandemic phase, how the local governance institutions was forerunner in looking, that the disaster management scenario. So, but the Disaster Management Act of 2005 provides a framework for an institutional response. And this framework does not provide adequate authority to the local governments. And then this experiments, this experience, if you're looking at the current pandemic, if you're looking at the urban local governance, which played, all of us know that how they have played a very proactive role, especially for the migrants, other community, for during the quarantine, treatment centers, implementary safety measures, for contact, identifying the contact persons, for all the mitigation interventions related to the pandemic, but then that also, that need to be strengthened. But budget, by looking at the disaster management, is almost completely neglected the role of the local structure, and then the last one, that, the budget, we know that, speaks increased outlay earmark for the capex, So when you're looking at that, the expenditure, the budget speaks about that. the infrastructure, then because this the earlier speaker was again speaking about the importance that is being given to the infrastructure building in the borders villages, type 2 and type 3 cities are definitely welcome. But when you're looking at the infrastructure, it is also important, to look at the past experiences, because the current annual budget is something about 30,000 million, that is, for creating capital assets. But then when we are looking at this perspective of the budget, which is looking at the capex, then you also have to look at the past experiences where, the such experiments, have allocating the budget, it is important, hyper-local functions to the local problem, how that is also have a problem because we also have situations like a BRTS and how that also caused the problem, So this whole, when you're saying about that, the maintenance fact, once, the central government is leaving down the assets there, and then the maintenance, because we have seen that, like this government is taking hand once they lay down the assets there. So maintenance of that, that structures, the capital assets, and that becomes the responsibilities of the local bodies, and without having a proper budget, because like again, we have only the, like now GST is not there because we're speaking about GST to be given part of it, but now we don't have it, only the property tax. And with a very financially crunched situation, to look up that, will become very difficult, especially, we have to look the past experiences and experiences of the local governance system in that, So with that, I would like to end that, budget, I feel it's an indicator, philosophical, ideological commitment of a government towards the ways of operationalization of that commitment. In that commitment, at least the indicative understanding about the role of local governance is not getting importance. It merits and demands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very in-depth analysis of the budget with respect to the local governance. I would now like to invite Dr. Joy Element for his insights. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to be with all of you, especially Professor Mathur and all my old friends. Let me start with a question we need to ask ourselves. Are we talking about local governance or local governments? So, I don't want to explain what it means, but then if it is about local government, we can actually talk about that as governments and then discuss. But if we are talking about local governance, we need to talk about the entire budget itself, because everything has something to do with local governance to some extent. That's one. Second one, when we are talking about local government, but for me, I think both have to be discussed. That is like this thing. The second one is rural versus the urban, because when you're talking about local governments or local governance, both, we need to also discuss about rural and urban, because in the present scenario, there are linkages. So we cannot take urban local governance or local governments as islands, because these are all interconnected, and the post-COVID scenario, we have seen that. So we need to discuss like that. Third is that even if you take urban governance for that matter, I think you will all agree to me that we never talk about urban governance. We talk about urban development, we talk about urban affairs. The ministry's name itself is still, I think it is Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, but not urban governance. In fact, post 74th Amendment itself, one of the problems we have faced is that we never pushed for urban local governance or even local governments. Instead, we always talked about, all the budgets talked about urban development. And that is one of the issues I feel, because we never talk. So naturally, the urban local governments are lost. in that, because we don't talk about urban. But that is not the real case with the post 73rd Amendment, where we still talk about panchayats, but we don't talk about this thing. The next issue is about, whenever we talk about urban, we tend to think about cities, whereas we have the cities and also the municipalities, and there are also the urbanizing rural local governments, the panchayats. So what are we talking about? That also have to consider, because the impact of this budget, the effects of this budget are on urbanization and urban governance, means we need to think about all these things. But then when we discuss this budget, I thought we should also start with our economic survey 21-22 and the approach they have been mentioning in the economic survey, for example. And we are talking about this budget when our country has not gone into the 13th five-year plan nor the 14th five-year plan, which is to come now. Because we have, parted with the plan preparation process. So there are no plans, development plans. In fact, because earlier we used to have that kind of the waterfall framework where we had the fixed plans and other things. But then now, as the economic survey itself says, it's about the barbell strategy, where there are flexibilities, you can change and all kinds of things. It's all fair enough. But then they also talk about doing away with the rigid urban master plans. But when you come to the budget, that part is not mentioned. Even when we say it is good that we talked about urban master plans, we need to have a real strategy and an approach, a different approach on urban master plans. Because it's even when we all talk about spatial planning and other things, the plans are not just spatial alone. It has to deal with socio-economic and other aspects, which always are missed when we have the master plans of the old generation master plans. So, and also as the economic survey itself quotes, it's a rigid urban master plan. So we need to have an approach and even a methodology on a revised methodology on preparing urban master plans. But all said and done, even when the country and most of the states except Kerala have parted away with the planning, we actually talk about plans in local governments. That's a good way of looking at things. But then when I come to the budget, we also need to understand that this is a post-COVID scenario. This budget does not actually consider that in that way, even though the economic survey and the initial part of the budget all talk about vaccinations as one of the sub-chapters itself. But then you go through the budget, you don't find that importance given in that. Because what we are going to face is, say, of course, the pandemic might be over, might be. But then the endemics will come up, endemics will show up. And so we are into a different age altogether. And in that context, our expenditure or investment or inputs in health had to be of a higher level. And that is a lot of implications for the local governance and local governments. So that is also one of the, and in fact, that is other question which I would ask is actually, there are all these critical sectors, especially in this context, because the fundamental issues. So it's not just about mentioning urban local governments or local governance in one bit of that. Many of the basic issues have impact on urban governance, local governance. For example, the overall approach I find is taken is something like this. The approach is that the budget is that the revenue expenditure is not that good kind of thing. So, and in fact, the assumption I understood is that, because people now have, the people's saving habits have gone up. Especially if you look at the Jan Dhan Yojana report, accounts and other things, you find that around 39,000 crore rupees have, the savings have gone up. So there is a spending hesitancy. And since there is a spending hesitancy, we are not putting money to support the poor. that's the way. See, because if you look at the MGNRGS, for example, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, see, that was one of the, I would actually consider that was one of the major schemes which actually reduced the number of suicides and deaths, I would say. That is the, actually for the most of the poor, and even not only just the poor, because it's applicable to everyone. During these times of the pandemic, the Employment Guarantee Scheme had a lot to do with the normal life being pursued or whatever it is. But then we need to actually start thinking whether the budget has addressed that issue. Instead of actually raising that amount, 25% has been reduced. See, that is in many other times, you would also say that the expenditure was less, so you can reduce it and other things, but that's not the case. See, 98,000 crores of rupees have been spent last year on MGNRGS or used in that year. Another 3,400 crores have not been paid. That's also still remaining. And that is the time when we are actually reducing by 25%, which I think cannot be accepted at all, because that is one of the major things which you need to understand. So that is one. The other issue is about the major areas, like major programs, the social security issues. See, because this is also going to be applicable. Say, for example, old age pension, for example, it should actually go up. Instead, it's coming down. I don't know how, whatever figures you take, how can it come down? See, from 1.21 lakhs to 0.99 lakhs. That is how can it go down? Because of the aging population, actually it should be going up. It is going down. Take the case of programs for the SCs, the STs, and many other things which are related to all these social security and other things which are everywhere. It's actually on the downside. It's going down. So that is actually giving us a message. And the message I understood was this one, that the revenue expenditure is so bad, is a bad thing. We need to actually, because if you put in money for all these sectors, then the development will be, because the spending habit will not be there, and all kinds of things, the argument which is there. But anyway, when I mentioned about the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and the positive impact of the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme during this time of the pandemic, I actually expected an urban employment guarantee scheme. Actually, I would have expected an urban employment guarantee scheme like the one Kerala has called the Ayangali Urban Employment Guarantee Scheme. So urban employment, the urban employment guarantee scheme, I would have expected that. And not only the urban employment guarantee scheme, with all the issues we are facing in the economy, what is our strategy for employment of the educated? So that also needs to be understood, because especially the urban areas, all of us would agree that there was an influx of people for jobs to the urban areas, and with the lockdowns and with the pandemic, the kind of change happened in that sector. We need to understand, and then what is this budget providing for us for the employment of the educated? That's the thing. And as I mentioned, we also need to think about the poverty, because we have the Oxfam Inequality Report, and then the Nidhi Aayog's Multidimensional Poverty Index, which are all applicable to the urban areas. And you also have the new poor, the post-COVID, the new poor, which have come in also, which are not considered earlier. And this budget should have addressed that also. Especially, we need to also think about the extreme poor, which is also extremely poor people also we need to understand in this one. Of course, as others have mentioned, the GST, the loss through GST, especially the main loss for the urban local governments is the loss through the GST. And there is no compensation. Forget about the states. States also don't get the compensation that way, but we have to actually push for that compensation for the local governments also, urban local governments and other local governments also. And in this new era, we are also talking about climate change, where climate change has to be addressed at the global level, the national level, but it has to be addressed at the local level also. and where a local action plan on climate change under the leadership of the local governments, especially the urban local governments, is a need. In fact, there has to be a strategy on a low carbon development pathway, especially starting with the urban local governments, especially with the urban floods and all other issues which are cropping up in the urban areas. We need to consider all these things. And Dr. Manjula, I had already mentioned about the disaster management. Here again, the framework is about a top-down command and control framework, but the interventions happen at the local level. And we need to actually start thinking about disaster management plans by the local governments, the urban local governments especially. I mean, in Kerala, we have tried to do that. So we need to. So this is about the budget in general. But then as Mathur sir has mentioned, we also need to consider the Finance Commission, the 15th Finance Commission. See, we have these two categories coming up. One is the category 1. It's a million+ cities, where it is 100% it is performance linked. What do you mean by this performance linked? Are these local governments what kind of doing projects or companies or kind of thing where you perform and then try to get the money? And also not only performance, it's a challenge fund. You are competing, which means to compete that you need to have consultants of a higher levels, so-called higher levels. The framework is such that a normal democratically elected local government would find it very difficult to adjust. So it's actually, sir already mentioned that the life difficult for the local governments. That would be the thing I would say. And then the category 2. The category 2, urban and the rural, it's actually 60% tied funds. And tied funds on what? It's basically on water. I don't disagree with the importance of the water issues and also the waste management issues. But there is another aspect to it. The approach has been that local governments means the old local governments where you work on your waste management and sanitation and other things. So that is your priority. We decide that this is our priority for you. So then what is the idea of a local self-government? That's an issue. So, and then there is also the health funds. Again, actually the local governments have nothing to do with the funds management, the planning and other things. So these are how the things. And then there is also one more thing which has come up is an urban agglomerations. I don't find anything in our constitutional amendments, the 74th or the 73rd, anywhere talking about. We have the DPCs there. We have many other things there. The Metropolitan Planning Committees, there are all kinds of things. I don't find any urban agglomeration committee. Urban agglomeration, we need to have that approach, definitely. That's why when I started saying also that there is a linkage between the rural and the urban and all. But then you are coming with a new sort of an institution, bypassing the parliament, bypassing the constitution. You come up with a new entity called an urban agglomeration where, this has not been worked out in detail on how it really functions. And again, the life becomes difficult for not only the urban local government, also the agglomerating panchayats also, how to deal with this kind of thing. So the legitimacy of that intervention itself and bypassing the states also. So that's again the thing. So here again, the first point which we discussed in the initial part of today's program itself is about the role of the state governments. On the one side, we say that the local governance is part of the state list. But then, where do we stand now? And here, I would actually try to quote from EPW, where Kerala's Chief Minister had written an year back. The states and the local governments are equal partners with the center in the structure of cooperative federalism. So there's a third tier of governments. See, we are actually forgetting that. That's why when I started talking, we never mentioned about, we don't mention about local governance and governments. We only mention about urban development or urban affairs. But we need to actually, so the states, the local governments and the center need to work together if you are talking about cooperative federalism. And there cannot be an asymmetric relation, which will actually result in fiscally disempowering the ties of the local governments and the governments closer to the people. And many of these development initiatives which are coming up as part of the urban development are all, in a way, disempowering the governance part of a local government, urban local government. So that also we need to understand. I conclude here. I can add when time is allowed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very thought-provoking analysis. I would now like to invite Dr. Javed for his perspectives on the topic. So.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you so much. And, I will start from where Dr. Jayalaman, ends. So when we talk about the role of local governments in the union budget, so really, we can say it's a very pathetic situation, because when, Government of India starts its budget consultation, so they invite different stakeholders. So in, those stakeholders, we have state finance ministers, we have trade unions, we have farmers groups, we have economists, and so on. But we haven't heard that, Government of India has invited the local governments, like in the pre-budget consultation. When we talk about the, term local government, so in the union budget document, we find it as local bodies. So, there is a no equal partnership and there is a no equal consultation. And also, I would say that after dismantling the planning commission and merger of the plan, non-plan category of fund, I think we have lost the touch of the local government with the union government. So with these remarks, I would say that, I'll focus, little bit on the speech of the finance minister. So, finance minister has not, recognized that we are facing a lot of problem in the country in terms of high unemployment, increasing poverty, rising inequality, and declining the consumption demand. In many of the, issues, local governments are very much related and they have been working on it. But I would say that, the government has a different kind of vision. So the vision about governance they always said that we want minimum government and maximum governance, which, in effect is very much, has the agenda towards privatization. So in this process, basically government is focusing, more focus should be on the private goods, not the public goods. So in that way, government is also not, thinking about the expanding the fiscal space or the expenditure capacity. So when we talk about the, fiscal space, so we know very well that Government of India has not been able to increase the public expenditure. Though, we have different sources of funding for the local government, starting from the, centrally sponsored scheme, central sector scheme, state sponsored scheme, borrowings, MLA-led, MP-led, and their own sources. But when we talk about the fiscal space, so even if, look at this current union budget, so the total spending of the government has got declined in terms of the, GDP. Like last year, we had the around 6% of public spending in terms of GDP. Now it has declined to 15%. So why it has declined? There is a question, because government is not thinking to, raise the resources and mainly focusing on the, indirect tax, GST and other sources, and they are not focusing much on the, direct tax, and even, the share of the indirect tax is getting declined, and they are not able to, tax the super rich. And you have seen that through inequality report that are, we have increased more millionaire, and, we are increasing our poverty ratio. So in that way, government is not interested, and because of that, we have effect on the allocation of the different ministries, different department, different section, and for different section of the population, whether it is the children, whether women, minorities, or scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. And when we talk about the, allocation of the, for instance, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So if we take the, percentage share, starting from 2014-15, and now, we can take the current figure. So there is not much increase. We can say like 0.4% of total budget we have increased for urban affairs. In 2014-15, it was around 1.4% of the union budget size. And now we have 1.9%. So we have not been able to increase the resources for this ministry. And also, we have a problem that, it is not that this union ministry is not demanding the money from the Ministry of Finance. It has been asking regularly that please provide us adequate money. But if you analyze the gap between the proposed outlay and budget estimate, so there is a huge gap. There is a huge gap. Like in 2019, whatever, ministry demanded, it got just 71% of that. It has also got decline in 2020-21 and just got 60% whatever it has demanded from the Ministry of Finance. Again in 2021-22, it has further declined and just got 55% of the total money demanded by the Ministry of Urban Affairs. So there is a demand, consistent demand, but ministry is not getting the fund. Now, in this budget, we have, already mentioned that there is a little increase from the previous year. But if we look at the, requirement and need of this growing urban population, so the budget is not, increasing in accordance to the need of the, population. Further, we can analyze the, expenditure priority of this ministry. So, we can say SBM is there, but Government of India has announced that they are going to cover Jal Jeevan Mission, but document is not reflecting any amount of allocation. Like more focus has been given on Amrut and smart cities. So out of the total allocation, 18% has been given to the Amrut and smart cities. And also we have metro and other, projects. 36% of the total ministry budget is going to metro. So they are focusing on more on infrastructure, but when we talk about the basic amenities, so the focus is very less. So I have mentioned SBM and JJM. And when we talk about the, Rozgar and employment, so NLM is there, but already it has been mentioned that there is no employment guarantee scheme, and just 1% of the total budget of the ministry is going to the NLM. So, there is a mismatch and there is a gap in terms of, expenditure priority as well. And we know that many commissions and many, committees have recommended that this much, public investment is required for, the Ministry of Urban Affairs, which is still we are not able to fulfill. When we talk about the actual utilization of the ministry, so there has been a problem recently, but now it is improving. So again, there are major infrastructure projects, so they take much time. Because of that, it is, not able to utilize the money. Further, if we talk about the, Ministry of Panchayat Raj, since we have, equal partner in this process, the Panchayat Raj institutions. So Ministry of Panchayat Raj is there. Initially, in 2013-14, it used to have the fund of 7,000 to 8,000 crore. But now it has just, 900 crore budget. And, we don't have any, effective scheme. We have just Rashtriya Gram Swaraj Abhiyan, though it was promised that in 2018 that ministry is going to spend around 7,000 to 8,000 crore under this scheme. RGSA, but we can see in this budget just 500 to 600 crore have been allocated under this scheme. So there is a very less focus in terms of, we can say, to the rural areas, and Ministry of Panchayati Raj is just functioning, but without any program, without any, budget. And, it is almost, we can say, like totally non-functional. The one thing which has to be, given to the local governments, which is the grants from the 15th Finance Commission. So again, we can see like whatever, last year was allocated in the budget 2020-21-22. So 44,000 was allocated for the rural local bodies, means Panchayati Raj institutions. Again, in the RE, it has, reduction to 42,000, and there is no much increase in, in this budget. It is just for 46,000 crore for Panchayati Raj institutions, for ULBs, and, you can say like it was 22 crore in 2021-22. In RE, it got reduced to the 14,000 crore. And again, in this B budget estimate of 2022-23, it has around 22,000 crore, which is same as the BE. So even whatever, constitutional grants supposed to be given to the transferred to be the local governments, it is not happening. So this is also a big challenge. Now, if we, recommend that what should be done. So I would say that first thing is that government should realize the need of the entire country, and, also recognize the situation happening in the country. For that, there is a need to increase the overall fiscal space. Without, increasing the fiscal space, we will not able to, have the adequate allocation for any community, any sectors. Like Joy has mentioned, we are giving a very small amount to the old age pensioners, even to the students in terms of a scholarship. So even in nutrition program, everywhere. And even we have, the frontline workers, we are giving, peanuts in terms of their wages and remuneration. So there is a need for increasing the overall fiscal space. And for that, government should, try to have a, progressive kind of taxation. We, poor are suffering, but, rich are getting richer. So there is a need, to focus on the tax policy. And for local governments, I would again reiterate that under the cooperative federalism, particularly in terms of sharing the resources, LGs should be the equal partner. Also, the allocation of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and MOPR should be increased as per the need. And whatever, CSS, centrally sponsored scheme, and CS they are running, they should have adequate space and autonomy for in terms of planning and implementation for the local governments. Otherwise, it is useless. Just, we can calculate the fund, but it is just sake of the calculation. Nothing, will happen. Further, I would say that whatever constitutional grant has been mandated, I am not going to comment in the flaws of the 15th FC, but I would say that whatever has been committed, it should be released, on time, and full grant should be given from the Government of India. And I think this is the only, grant where they have some kind of autonomy, I would say, not full autonomy. Then if we are, discussing that, local government should be part of the, union government, then they should be considered equal stakeholders. Otherwise, it is, useless to talk about the role, relation of the local governments with the union government. And also, I would say that the documents which we are, having in the public domain on budget, prepared by the Ministry of Finance, they should mention, local governments instead of local bodies, because there is a, no recognition of this, local governments in the union budget document. We are mentioning everywhere, local bodies. So I will end here, and I will take if, if there is any question. Thank you so much.
Right. So we are way above the time. What we'll do is to bring forth all the questions. Mostly Manish Thakre sir asked. Sir, if you want to come and ask yourself, Meanwhile, Mahima, please read out the other questions for the panelists.
Yes, so there is a question by Manish Thakre, sir. Should I read that out?
Read that.
Recently, the essay has asked state and city governments to take enumeration of children in street situations. And we all know childcare institutions are in urban areas. There is a demand and supply gap. Want panel for their reflection.
Okay, and any in chat box? Just.
Yes. So no further questions.
Okay. So let us go in the same order, and please also take this as a way forward round and incorporate whatever you can in like 2-3 minutes. So shall we start with Professor Mathur? And sir, please also unmute yourself. Yeah. So please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
It's working. Yes.
I'm saying that it's a very large agenda that we have covered over the past 1.5 hours or so, beginning with the main question that what is the role of local government? What is the role of the central government in local government governance? I think there's a very major question that we have raised. What is the role? Should they be playing that role? Or should we go according to what the Constitution says, that the local government is a state subject, and therefore the state should be responsible for what they do. And as I said, over the years, what we have noticed is that the impact of what the central government says with respect to local government is far more important than what the state government does or what the local government does. So this change has come despite the fact that we have the 74th Constitutional Amendment, but despite that, this change has come over the past several years. One. The second question, which I found very interesting by Professor Manjula, was what is the basic philosophy that really underlines local government function? Does it really represent what the state government wants something to be done? Or does it really represent the intent, the political philosophy and the intent of what the central government wants the country to move in that direction and local government to follow that kind of line? There's a second question that I found very interesting. And in relation to that was, of course, the role of decentralization. To what extent have we really decentralized to local government, whether it is the issue of functions, the 18 functions, or whether it is the issue of the fiscal space, whether fiscal space is really expanded over the years, or whether it has declined. There was also this larger issue of inequalities in COVID-19 and the kind of impact that these two very major things that have happened over the past 3, 4, 5 years, rising inequalities in COVID, have impacted the local government function. So it is really these three larger issues that I found very interesting. Having been associated with the 74th Constitutional Amendment, not just with that, but the predecessor of the 74th Constitutional Amendment was the 65th Amendment, which got lost in Rajya Sabha by 2 votes. I think, first of all, we need to realize that this is more of an advisory, and barring 2 or 3 clauses with respect to the amendment, the main 2 clauses, that is the functions and the finances, are still discretionary, and state government takes decisions with respect to what functions to be devolved and what fiscal space should be given to local governments. While the other several issues such as elections, participation of women in the council, in the local councils, issues with respect to the metropolitan planning committees and district planning committees, they seem to be mandatory in nature. But the two things that would have really made difference to the local governments are really the 74, the Schedule 12 and the fiscal space, where, as I said, powers is to rest with the state government. Now, it's very difficult to get into the prescriptive part, that what is it that the central government needs to do, and nor is it really a question that we should be dealing with in a lighter vein. I think it's a very major question and to be examined very closely. But if we really look at the whole urban policy, and I think Niti Aayog has been invoked a number of times in the discussion, in the year 2018 and 19, the Niti Aayog set up an informal group. I happen to be a member of that one, to suggest what should be done in order that the urban areas contribute to the objective of a 5 trillion economy. What is it that we need to do in order to enable cities and towns to really deliver a $5 trillion target that the central government was laying itself as for one. The second mandate of the committee was that by the year 2047, India should really become a developed country. And this is what I think the finance minister also had in mind when she invoked that by the year 2047, India would be 50% urban, and lay the pathway for India to really do this kind of an orderly development. The kind of responses that we have seen so far coming in, whether it is smart cities or whether it is Amrit or whether it is other two programs, as the three programs, housing, livelihood, and these are still project-based activities. They have a very limited life, a 5-year life or 7-year life. When the smart cities in Amrit came into being in 2015, not as a part of the budget, but as part of the executive decision. Now, there's hardly any way in which we can link these 5 missions to what the larger macroeconomic goals are, which are, as I said, India becoming a developed country, and that if we go by the definition of the World Bank, I think the cutoff between the developed and developing country is about 21 or 22,000 US dollars per capita. So we just don't see the link between that. As I think was mentioned by, I forget, the fiscal space of local government being 2% of the GDP. It's not 2%, it's less than that, 2%, for at least for the past 5-6 years. And I think it's going down with the 3 taxes entering into the GST, local taxes entering into the GST basket. We're seeing even shrinking of the fiscal space, particularly the own source revenue are increasing, is shrinking. What is increasing, however, is the central government share. So what has happened? Can you see me? Yeah.
We can see, yes.
Yeah. So what has really happened is while the central government share is increasing in local government finance, local government's own share is declining. And if this is any indication of how we are going to deal with local governments in the future, I don't think I need to be explicit about it. We all can visualize what the future of the local government would be. The irony here is that if you have seen the chapter titles, in the report of the Central Finance Commission, both the 2020-21 report, which was a one-year report, and if you see the 5-yearly report, the chapter is titled Empowering Local Government. But all the actions and all the proposals and the framework of the proposals that has come into being, and they are not apologetic about it. They are saying that we're putting in a new fiscal architecture. We are putting in a new intergovernmental fiscal framework wherein local governments would be given these resources provided ABC are done. And the flexibility of local government in the use of the financial finance commission grant is limited. First of all, it is given only to non-metropolitan cities, one. And secondly, the amount which is really theirs in this, it's untied money, is just about 40% of the grant. 40 or 60, I think I'm not remembering that 40% is tied and 60% is untied or the other way. So this is the only fiscal Swiss that they have. And they're playing a much bigger role now in their finances than ever. And we don't know what is the new fiscal architecture, which has got this one component is this one, and the second component being redesignating local public goods as national level priorities. Now, this trend has been going on. I do not know whether you have been following how the centrally sponsored schemes have been framed and what the new rules have come in with respect to Team India 2022. There's a working note of the Niti Aayog under this title, Team India, as well as the way in which the centrally sponsored schemes have been reformulated. All of them point to shrinking fiscal and functional space of local governments. This is the new fiscal architecture. And if this is the new fiscal architecture, we can all visualize, we can begin to think in terms of where we are heading. When it comes to urbanization, and that is what the chairperson of the deputy mayor started with, I think I should have sent a copy of the report to you, and I would just send me your email and I'll forward it to you. A State of the Cities report, which is on the ISS website as well. It's passing through a very difficult stage. It's passing through a very difficult stage. With the government once again, without any apology, saying that we are urbanizing rapidly and that we are producing, urban areas are producing 70% of the GDP. This is what one of the statements came from, perhaps the highest executive of the government of India. Now, if indeed that were true, our cities would be the most productive in the world. Producing 70, 32 or 33 or 35, you pick up any percentage. If they produce 70% of India's GDP, they're among the most productive cities of the world. Nowhere else would you find this kind of a ratio. But they have no apology about it. Those figures are wrong. They don't publish the figures now. The latest figure is 2011-12. The 2017-18, which should have come as a matter of routine, was held up because they were giving results they were uncomfortable with. And therefore, we keep on working on unrealistic assumptions. In many ways, they are wrong assumptions, but that is what they seem to be working on. I think reference was made to urban policy document of the ministry, the 10 sutras or the 10 principles. I don't know what to make out of it, honestly. This is not the occasion to really be discussing what to make out of it. But let me not go on. I mean, we can go on for days and days.
One thing with your experience, I just thought to ask you that do you think that the figures for urbanization rate at 2047 would be 50%? Because I think that's a conservative estimate because China is already 2/3 and the way it's moving, even our numbers, do you think the number for 50% urbanization rate at India
what the finance minister has done is to use the UN projections. And UN projections do indicate about 50%. Now, we have done only projections up to 2036. That is by the technical committee. I'm sure all the panelists would have seen the technical committee report, which came in 2019, end of 2019. But I don't think it is a conservative thing. I don't think, as I very briefly mentioned, if you take simply the 2001-11, our statutory town population is not growing. It's hardly barely growing. And therefore, and not therefore, and much of the increase, a good part of the increase, let me bring in one more figure, and after that I will not talk about figures. If you simply see the breakup of the 90 million people increase that took place in India's urban population between 2001 2011, the share was 40% of that was natural increase, which is really not urbanization, it's simply urban population increase. 22% was from rural to urban migration. And the balance really came out of the census tracts, which is really redesignating rural areas which had acquired urban characteristics. And the rural to urban migration, which is considered to be the most transformatory component of urbanization, is staying at this level for the past 4 census decades. It is varying between 20 and 22% share for the past 4. So our migration is not going down, which is another fallacy in the statements which are made, often made by the government. People are just coming into the city. They are not coming into the city. So our urbanization, which should have been transformatory in nature, where the rural to urban component is the most transformative one, is more or less standard. So the economic rationale for migration has not been adequately recognized by the government, that this is what we do. And therefore you see the migrant coming, going back, migrants coming, going back, state done. There is a regionalism within the migration pattern. They should migrate within the same state, but not across the state. Just like capital mobility is important for growth, so is the labor mobility, and so are the other factors of production. Let me stop here. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajat.
Thank you, sir. In future, we will learn more from you on all these very insightful topics, and I'll invite everyone. Thank you. Dr. Javed, over to you. Your concluding.
Thank you so much. Most of the things have been covered by Professor Mathur. So I have nothing, say too much. But here, just I will repeat whatever I, mentioned in my presentation. That, when we talk about the local government and union budget, I think we should do some kind of advocacy that these ministries, whether MOPR or Housing and Urban Affairs, they should work like a local self-government. Even these, name of these ministries should also be, changed. And they should work together as a local self-government ministry, like including MOPR, MORDA, and other schemes like whether, integrated child development service, whatever, CSS are going to the grassroots level up to Panchayat and up to block. They should be part of that. And also there should be some kind of, bifurcation, like we have the housing scheme for urban and rural, again, the education schemes like Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan or any other schemes related to social sector. They should be, bifurcated and named as rural and urban, so that we can get to know about their allocation, their priority. And there is a, need of a lot of transparency in the, budgets of these tiers. And also, government of India should also connect with the, local governments, maybe through planning or any other way, in Niti Aayog should come in, and these local governments should be included in the process of the budgeting. We don't have planning after dismantling this planning commission, but there should be something should be devised and formulated so that we can connect the local governments. Now there is a complete, disconnection between the center and local government. So we should do something like that. So I'll end here, and thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Manjula, ma'am.
Thank you. So it was very interesting to hear Professor Mathur. We have actually read him a lot and feeling good to hear him live. The coming, like these questions that has been asked to end it, when we're looking at local governance, this whole principle of decentralization, and then the decentralization affected through deconcentration, deregulation, devolution, and privatization. And then in all these spaces, we are looking at the importance of power, devolution of power as one of the important things to make the local governance workable, efficient, and then, working towards a just society with social justice, So when we are looking at this question of power, it is equally important, that embedded in this power, web of power relations, I feel, consumed, because when we are thinking about the local governance, it is very important to bring in the marginal section, vulnerable section, the peripheral section into the discourse of governance. And then the power becomes important there and embedded in the web of power relations. When they're consumed by the anxieties about their own marginalities and the neglect, legacies, when you're looking about their past neglect, it is quite common for the marginals to internalize these hegemonic values and pernicious norms into their cognitive, emotional, and psychic systems and social structures, So once we understand that these structures is being embedded into their psyche, the internalized hegemonic structures, and that becomes designed their desires, which is a very problematic feature of the ethos of a democratic values, So then what is there, that what happens is that situation, a problematic understanding is that the marginals, to maximize the satisfaction of the desire, collaborate actually to their own marginalization, I feel. And that is where the hegemony of power and the devolution of power that we're looking at is important when you're looking at this local governance structure. How can that, the counter-hegemonic desires, which could even be fashioned, designed by the hegemonic power. So my whole question and the desire and the hope is that whether the local governance institutions, local governance will be able to make a break or fissures into these hegemonic structures of power, will be able to make a dent into the hegemonic structures of power and make, systems moving towards democratic ideals, norms, and values through this lens of local governance, like Amartya Sen was speaking about, there are ideas, ideologues, and then institutions and practices. So the important thing when we are trying to understand, how the ideas or the ideologues are different from the practices when they have been institutionalized through the institutions. So whether there has been any kind. So here, the inclusive democracy, the participative democracy, just democracy are the ideologies for the local governance, where we have the local governance institutions. But when we, practice, use that, and use the 73rd and 74th Amendment through the institutional structures of local governance, when we try to change, institutionalize, implement those ideas into the practices, whether they speak with each other, what are the divergent positions, why they're being divergent, why they're not able to talk with each other, this whole question. And that is what, so this whole question about the CapEx driven union budget 2022, I would like to see and watch whether that would reflect in this whole question about, the deepening of the democracy, widening of the democratic value through the institutions of local governance. So that is something that we would like to see and watch. I want to be optimistic, but cynical at the same time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Joy, sir.
Thank you. I need to really tell 2 points. One, the issue of the State Finance Commission. We are actually talking about the Central Finance Commission and all, but the situation with regard to the State Finance Commission in many of the states is pathetic. So it's not just the center. I mean, the state level also, there has to be efforts. And that way, some of these suggestions in the budget and the CFC awards have some positive elements, which we need to accept. Second, the capacity part. See, I mean, that's a real challenge. And if you look at the states, barring a couple of states, no state has an institution or a center or any of that sort for developing capacities of the urban local governments. We have the SIRDs. Now they have been redefined as SIRD and Panchayat Raj, but almost all the states except a couple of states do not have anything to do with capacity development for urban local governments, whether it is for the elected representatives or for the officials or for the technical staff don't. So these are 2 things which you also need to understand and then take it forward. I mean, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Tikender, sir, would you like to have any parting?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Arjun. And it was really lovely hearing all our panelists, especially Professor Manjula, Professor Mathur, Joy Saab, Professor Javed, and of course, everyone from there. But the point is actually, after this union budget, and this is what has rightly been pointed out by our panelists, that there's a huge demand that is in the urban sector. So we actually focus on the supply side from the union government. But Arjun, I think it is also time that why is not there a demand from within, from below? Take, for example, from the local bodies. Take, for example, from the elected local governments. This is something I have been repeatedly pointing out, the role of the All India Council of Mayors. I mean, it's a completely defunct, redundant organization which comprises the elected mayors. Actually, they are the ones who should have actually raised this issue most vehemently. But if you go to their office, I mean, they're not even paying salaries to their watchmen. Forget about, bringing out some documents, which should have been very pivotal. The point is actually, and Professor Manjula is actually, I agree with her when she was speaking about the hierarchy in the urban structures. And that is, I think, the new class. I mean, I don't know which new class that is going to be in the urban centers. But actually, the slogans that were coined by Lefebvre, like "Right to the City," that sort of movement is something which is direly required from the urban centers. And that movement reclaiming their right to urban planning, whether we call it right to the city or what some of the Italian sociologists and urban planners have been actually advocating since long, and that is for the working class to treat urban centers as factories, not just factory gates. So the demonstration shouldn't just be at the factory gates, but the demonstration treat the city as a factory, because it is this place where this hierarchy exists. It is this place where humongous amount of surplus is getting generated from squeezing the working people. And I do not have to list that. And actually the budget, I think, is to be seen through this slide. So probably what we as social groups, as different civil society groups are actually advocating right now has to be broadened further. And it is this space where new forces, I believe, are going to emerge. For example, the kind of gig economy that is coming up. You just recently witnessed a big strike in urban company, the platform-based economy that I'm talking about. And it's just at the platform-based economy counter, you cannot contest. This contestation has to be a little wider. And that contestation has to be at a larger scale, at a city scale. So once that intervention starts happening, I think this legitimate right of the urban and of reclaiming the right of the urban, not just according to demands, economic demands, but and the wider, larger questions that we have discussed in this panel will probably account for more focus. At the present mode, it's quite top-bottom model. And these models, that's why we have seen us talking about, and Joyce was talking about Kerala, but Kerala is a different ball game. And I think I have mentioned it somewhere. It was also there in West Bengal when Ashok Mitra brought out this whole formula of decentralized election format for the urban, for the rural bodies. But I think more than that is required, and probably this debate has to continue further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So it's almost lunchtime for everyone. So to give an official vote of thanks, Mahima, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So as we come to the end of this very enriching and insightful deliberation on local governance and Union Budget 2022-23, I, Mahima Kapoor, researcher at IMPRI, would like to formally propose a vote of thanks. On behalf of the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, I thank our distinguished panel for taking out the time to be with us today. We are grateful to Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar for chairing the discussion and driving it with his valuable inputs and interventions. Thank you, sir. We thank our panelists, Dr. Javed Alam Khan, Professor Manjula Bharathy, Professor Om Prakash Mathur, Mr. Srinivas Alavilli, and Dr. Joy Ellerman for sharing their pertinent analysis and perspectives on Budget 2022. And of course, we are grateful to all our participants who have joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, or would be watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast. We hope that you continue to tune in to our future episodes of #Local Governance, as well as our other #Web Policy Talks. We also invite you to join us for more of our upcoming discussions on the Union Budget 2022 in the coming days. Thank you again, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.